The Soulsbournes series has never really clicked with me. For many years at this point, I've been repeating the cycle of seeing something cool in a Souls game, trying to play it, and ultimately deciding that it wasn't for me. Between my Xbox One and Steam account alone, I probably have 3 or 4 different characters in Dark Souls 3, all of which stopped either just before or just after the Crystal Sage, which I'd say is just about 15 to 20% through the game. I tried Sekiro, I was bad at it. I tried Elden Ring, I was bad at it, but that one was a little bit different. I have yet to beat the game, but I have been at the final boss for quite some time. Though I enjoyed it, I can't help but hate how poorly designed I find the Elden Beast, making it a truly miserable fight for me for reasons other than just difficulty. I'm sure I'll get shit for that, but, who cares? Most recently, I tried the Demon Souls remake. It's an absolutely beautiful game with new animations and a complete overhaul of the game's visual style, but like the others, I just bounced right off of it. Then comes along Bloodborne, the oldest of all the games I've mentioned so far, except for the original Demon Souls, of course. I tried to play it once, but again, something about it just didn't really work for me. But here we are, 2023. I tried Bloodborne one last time after a brief spurt of inspiration. This time, however, I guess it worked. This time, I wasn't pushed away by the genre's shortcomings, I was enjoying it. I was having fun, for what seemed like the first time in the Soulsbournes series. This is how Bloodborne changed the way I play Souls-likes. There will be some spoilers for Bloodborne in this video, in addition to a few minor spoilers for other From Software games. The very best element of Bloodborne is its atmosphere, and it's the main thing we're going to be talking about today. Many of the Souls games do an amazing job at this, and we'll talk about that later, but I think it's perfectly on display in this gothic world. From the very beginning, Bloodborne fully commits to its horror elements. Even so much as the first cutscene is terrifying. You're helpless, unable to move, unable to fight as a massive bloodied creature reaches out to you with its razor-sharp claws. At some point, you'll become more comfortable with the beast you'll be hunting, but fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you see it, Bloodborne does everything in its power to keep you uncomfortable. At several key points throughout the game, the sky will go through various changes, altering the moon and the skyline around it. Not only does this give a lot of character to the world, but it also signifies some major changes in the state of the city and the enemies that you'll be fighting. While the beginning is terrifying, the progression of your waking nightmare makes the early stages of the game feel like a dream. As the world around you, and in conjunction its inhabitants, become progressively more foreign and incomprehensible to you, you'll have to wonder what the actual fuck is transpiring. Something that is communicated beautifully throughout the world. The thing is, though, it's not necessarily meant to make sense, and that's part of what makes this game so special. If it hasn't become clear already, Bloodborne takes a lot of inspiration from Eldritch horror sources like H.P. Lovecraft, and one of the most prominent themes from those stories is the idea of incomprehensible cosmic horrors, entirely by design. Things inherently become less scary when you understand them, so making the descent in Bloodborne be decidedly incoherent was a deliberate choice to inflict a primal fear on the player. The way this game uses it, though, is masterful, and although it's done in a similar fashion in the rest of From Software's catalog, it stood out to me in Bloodborne as the best aspect of the entire game. You're told at some points that due to certain circumstances, the moon has begun to transform the citizens of Yharnam into beasts. Despite explicitly telling you this, the game does an amazing job of showing this through the enemies. Most types early on will be various stages of the human's transformation into beasts, mainly large werewolves. Some are more human-like, whereas others will gain some excessive hair or other wolfish features, but regardless, it's a clear path of progression that can be understood by observing the enemies. One great example of this is Father Gascoigne, arguably the first real boss of the game. He's pretty deep into his transformation at the point that you meet him, but it's evident that his retained humanity is fighting desperately to stay in control. Take this against the outright werewolf enemies, and what we can assume are much larger variations of this based on bosses like the Cleric Beast and Vicar Amelia, who seem to be fairly welcoming of this transformation. You're pretty much able to take all this information away yourself with the clues that are on display via the world and the slim exposition that you get from a couple of characters. From Software's obsession with indirect storytelling is fully on display here and can be viewed similarly in other games of the series. While I haven't personally completed Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 or the ending section of Demon Souls, I have taken quite the effort to familiarize myself with them while working on this video. Not only have I watched several of my friends play through them, but with some independent research and watching major sections of the game, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on how they manage their world building. Like Bloodborne, you're going to get very little outright exposition. Some bosses may reference events and other characters, characters, some NPCs will discuss factions present in the world, but a lot of it will be poetic nonsense, especially to players unfamiliar with the lore. These stories, aside from maybe Sekiro, are told primarily through item descriptions and other indirect methods, which can make the act of piecing everything together on your own very frustrating. However, something I never really took notice of in the time I played through Elden Ring or what I completed of Dark Souls 3 and Demon Souls is how they also use finer details in the environment to expand on that story. My favorite thing in most games is trying to understand what the developer set out to do or say with how they made their game. Unfortunately, I honestly can't say that I really got it until I got hooked on Bloodborne. A notable example of this is in From Software's first entry in the series, Demon Souls. One section of the game finds the player in the Tower of Latria. Semi-cryptic item descriptions aside, the storytelling in the tower is absolutely amazing. It is essentially a prison, church, and throne room all stacked on top of each other, which has its own implications for the world, but I'm not going to get into that here. The standout area to me, and to most people it seems, is the Prison of Hope, an enormous penitentiary filled with wailing prisoners and haunting inhuman jailers. This area of the game is, to put it simply, absolutely miserable, but in the best way possible. It's not miserable because it's punishingly difficult, it's miserable because the developers fully intended to convey the horror of the prison through the world. From the soft and droning song finding you wherever you are in the tower to the jailer's lanterns cutting through the fog, the Prison of Hope is as much a mental hurdle as it is a physical one, something that I didn't fully appreciate until I played through Bloodborne. I guess what this game finally made me realize is that the Souls series is so much more than punishing bosses and bullshit grab attacks. When you ask a Souls fan what they look for most in a game, they often answer with something relating to these massive spectacle bosses. These same bosses that have you slamming your head against a wall for hours at a time. And while yes, these bosses and the methodical combat is certainly one of the main selling points of the series, it's so much more than that. Early in Bloodborne, you'll hear a bunch of made-up words. Bergenworth, the healing church. Cause. Or some say Cosm. Things like that. And you'll hear them more and more the further you go. I'm sure, like me, this will all be complete nonsense to you, at the beginning at least. At some point you'll continue to hear them, and then you'll walk a couple steps further and you'll actually be standing inside of them, exploring their inner workings and trying to learn everything you possibly can. These mystical locations that you read and hear about in passing are always so much stranger than you could have imagined. The thing about the Souls series is that they pride themselves on subverting expectations in some way, whether that be through their world, combat, story, enemies. They always seem to find a way, and Bloodborne, once again, is a natural standout. I find Bloodborne's world to be so discernible from the mainline Dark Souls games for a couple of reasons. First of all, it looks completely different to most Souls-likes. Let me explain. Most Souls games take place in a very grim, Dark Age world. Despite the fact that the genre is defined more often by its stamina-based melee combat coupled with its unique healing mechanics, the typical dark fantasy theme is as much of a staple as any of the other important factors. Bloodborne has all of these things, but the difference is the time period it chooses to portray. If you look at Dark Souls and Demon Souls, it seems like a pretty stupid thing to say that they're not in the same period as Bloodborne because it's obvious, but it's actually a lot more important than it may seem. In changing the time period, and in turn the entire theme of the world, it means you have to change just about everything else. Sekiro does something similar, but this isn't a Sekiro video. The decision to make Yharnam a city based most closely on the Victorian 1800s era of London was an incredibly deliberate choice, in the same way all of the other decisions are. In Dark Souls, the weapons are classic Dark Age weapons of warfare, long swords, crossbows, daggers, catapults, and because it's dark fantasy, some spells and pyromancy and such. Bloodborne is not that though. They could have easily done an identical weapon system, but instead, they did trick weapons. Trick weapons are one of the best additions to the series, which gives each weapon two forms, giving you the option to deal with enemies at range and combo a wide variety of different attacks. This makes more sense when you take a thorough look at the world. This whole people turning into monsters thing has happened before, and you get the sense that maybe it wasn't to the same extent, but it's the entire reason why being a hunter is a job. This is exactly why all the weapons you find throughout Bloodborne have two forms, so that they can easily be adapted to situations in which there are multiple creatures or something else unexpected. The way that FromSoft contextualizes this major overhaul in their typical weapon system requires such a ridiculously impressive attention to detail that I think a lot of developers can learn from. It's sort of like going to a Halloween party, but the only person there who can tell you what their costume is From Software. The second reason I think Bloodborne's world works so well is how they weave the Lovecraftian influence into the game. About 50 to 60% of the way through Bloodborne, a major turning point occurs upon killing Rom the vacuous spider. The sky changes, once again, and things generally start to make a lot less sense. The most notable change is the appearance of enormous spindly creatures around the map called Amidalas. These are presented as uncaring beings worshipped as outer gods. This is one of the most common tropes in Lovecraftian horror stories, but what makes this influence so impressive is not its inclusion in Bloodborne, it's how they utilize it to solidify the themes of rebirth they've established up to this point, and then how they form the idea of humanity's insignificance. Regardless of the way you feel about the lore, the way the world portrays all of the batshit insane happenings in the world is intended to make the player feel isolated, confused, and just plain uncomfortable, which leads me to the third reason Bloodborne's atmosphere and design works so well. It's genuinely terrifying. As I mentioned earlier in this video, Bloodborne fully commits to its horror elements, and although through and through it is an action RPG, that doesn't mean it can't be scary, and trust me, it is. It may not hit you initially, but the more time you spend with the game, the more it becomes gradually terrifying. The more inconspicuous tombstones you see covering every area of the world, the more it begins to sink in that you're treading over thousands of dead bodies. At some point after this clicks, you'll realize just how many of these bodies didn't make it into the endless graves all over the city. Lifeless corpses are lining the streets. One moment that sticks out to me is Hemwick Charnel Lane, a short optional area that you'll find early on in the game. Hemwick contains an enemy type that I find actually scary, and not only because they can kill you easily at this stage of Bloodborne. Seeing their glowing white eyes pierce you through the inevitable darkness feels like such a unique experience while playing through Bloodborne that it stuck with me despite being such a small and relatively insignificant piece of my playthrough. Playing through the game is more so a test of your mental fortitude than the other Souls games I've experienced, and not because the bosses will piss you off to no end. Bloodborne is a scary game, even if it's not in the traditional horror sense. It can take a lot of courage to see a certain enemy or what lies inside of a room and decide that it's time to challenge it on your own. Because of the inexplicably horrific enemies you'll discover throughout the game, there's a good chance you'll find your skin crawling at many points throughout Bloodborne. Now that you finally understand what makes Bloodborne so special, allow me to explain why it's special to me. Like I said in the intro, the Souls series and I don't fit too well together. I've historically had a hard time enjoying what feels like needlessly clunky mechanics and a poor effort of teaching the player things, but when I decided to try Bloodborne, I was ready to give up on the series. An unprecedented level of FOMO rears its ugly head when you can't enjoy a game that everyone else does, even if you feel like you should. In my countless deaths throughout the game, I simply found other things to love. By fixating on the visual storytelling and unrivaled detail provided by From Software, it gave me something to love about the games that everyone else enjoys. Even if it's not for the same reasons, that's okay. Video games, like most mediums of entertainment, are extremely subjective and extremely personal to players and developers alike. Whether somebody likes a game because they played it at a certain time in their life, they enjoy the story it tells, it reminds them of a close relative, or they just like the gameplay, it doesn't matter, as long as you find something that suits your taste. I understand the get good mentality, and I recognize that I'll never be good at the Souls games, but I don't think I have to be anymore. I'm not sure if at this point I've accomplished what I set out to do. I intended to highlight just how good Bloodborne's world design is at communicating certain themes or story events to the player. In turn, Bloodborne actually opened my eyes to appreciating the world design of other From Software games, and in turn just more games in general. But I think this may have gotten away from me at some point. Maybe now I can finally find it in me to finish Dark Souls 3. Despite this video being a bit of a mess, in closing this one out, I do want to leave you with a final message. The next time that you play a Dark Souls game, after you've slain the hulking impenetrable knights, the torch-wielding zombies, or weird mushroom aliens, take a look around. In the spare moments you have between these stressful duels and stubborn boss runs, just breathe. You deserve it. Take in what's going on around you, outside of you. These worlds are, in many ways, ugly, cruel, hopeless, but finding solace in those brief moments of respite can transform the experience into something truly beautiful. That is just about all I have for you guys today. Thank you all for watching this far. I'm not sure exactly how long this video will end up being, but if you're still here at this point, I really appreciate it, and I sincerely hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to support me, the best way to do so as of right now is to like the video and comment literally anything. If you're feeling generous, you can even subscribe for more content like this video, or some more content that's not like this video occasionally. Anyways, thank you all one last time for watching. Again, I hope some part of this was enjoyable for you, and I will catch you in the next one.